Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we are climbing into the cabs of Alberta long-haul truckers, the ones who spend their lives on frozen highways, forgotten gravel roads, and lightless rest stops, where the only witnesses are the trees and the snow. These are not campfire tales. These are the stories whispered over diesel engines and late-night coffee, when drivers talk about the things that followed them down the highway, the voices that should not know their names, the loads that vanished without a trace, and the fellow truckers who left a yard and were simply never seen again. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of the Alberta highway and truck stops, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Calvin Mercer, and I've been hauling freight through Alberta's frozen highways for more than 19 years. I've seen whiteout storms that looked like the sky was erasing the world. And I've seen animals wander out of the tree line with eyes that reflected headlights like tiny mirrors. But nothing has ever stayed lodged in my mind the way that night outside Fort McMurray did. It was late January, one of those nights where the cold hurts your teeth when you breathe. I was pushing through the final stretch before dawn when dispatch called in a warning about black ice along Highway 63. Nothing unusual, but the tone in the operator's voice. It had a tremble, like he wanted to say more, but couldn't. I remember gripping the wheel, radio static filling the cabin, when I saw her. A woman standing dead center in the snowy median, wearing nothing but a thin gray nightdress, barefoot, motionless. Her skin looked almost blue in my headlights, and her hair was dripping as if she had just climbed out of water, even though the closest lake was miles behind me. I slowed down, thinking she was a stranded motorist or someone in trouble. But as I rolled closer, no more than 20 feet away, she slowly lifted her head. And I swear on my life, she smiled right at me. A smile that wasn't relief, but recognition. That smile froze me more than the cold ever could. It wasn't wide or exaggerated, just a slow, deliberate curl of her lips, like she'd been waiting for me specifically. My instincts told me not to stop, but something in her expression felt wrong. Not scared, but confused, almost familiar. I eased the truck forward, rolling past her at barely 10 kilometers an hour. As my window aligned with her, she tilted her head, too far, unnaturally far, like she was studying me. Her eyes were dark, but not from makeup or shadows. It was like there was no reflection in them at all, no shine from my headlights. Just black, empty pits. I grabbed the radio. Dispatch, I've got a pedestrian on the median. Female, no coat, looks hypothermic. Should I stop and assist? But all I heard was static. Not the normal kind either. This was a deep, pulsating distortion, like someone breathing directly into the speaker, slow and heavy. I turned back to look at her again, and my stomach dropped. She was standing closer. I hadn't seen her move, and she wasn't running. She was just there, about 10 feet from the truck now, her head still tilted, her nightdress fluttering in the windless air. I hit the gas on instinct. For a moment, the tires slipped on the ice, and she took a single step toward me, so smooth it looked like she was gliding across the snow. That's when I realized something impossible. There were no footprints behind her. My tires finally gripped, and the truck lurched forward. I didn't floor it, but my foot was pressing the pedal harder than I'd like to admit. The road ahead was empty, stretching into a blue-black darkness that swallowed the headlights. For a moment, I let myself believe it was over. that she was just some hallucination brought on by fatigue and the cold. But then my passenger side mirror caught movement. A shape. Her shape. She wasn't standing still anymore. She was walking along the median, keeping pace with my truck, barefoot, in snow up to her ankles. And she wasn't struggling. Each step looked effortless, almost weightless, like she wasn't touching the ground at all. My chest tightened. This wasn't possible. I was going over 40 kilometers per hour now. Yet every time the mirror bounced from the icy road, her figure flashed back into view, closer each time. I rolled down the window a crack to yell at her, to tell her to get away from the highway. But the moment I did, a wave of cold, damp air crashed into the cab. And beneath it, a smell, like pond water left to rot, muddy, moldy, suffocating. Then I heard something I can't unhear. A woman's voice, whispering from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Calvin, slow down." My name. She knew my name. I slammed the window shut, heart pounding so hard it felt like the steering wheel vibrated with every beat. But when I looked back at the mirror, she was gone. The road was empty, or so I thought. For maybe 10 seconds, I stared at that mirror, praying I'd imagined it. My breath fogged the inside of the cab, and my hands were shaking so badly I could feel the tremor through the steering wheel. The road curved slightly ahead, leading into a long stretch of forest on both sides. I tried focusing on the center line, on anything except the thought that she might reappear. And then, something tapped the passenger door, a single soft tug. I jerked the wheel, swerving just enough to make the trailer sway before I corrected. My eyes shot to the right, and there she was. Not running, not gliding, standing, right outside the door, inches from the glass, her face level with mine. I hadn't even seen her approach. Her hair was plastered across her cheeks as if soaked, strands frozen into thin icicles. Water dripped from her chin, splattering lightly against the door. Her lips were slightly parted, but her chest wasn't moving. She wasn't breathing. My radio flickered with static again, followed by a low, gurgling whisper that blended with the crackle. "Why did you leave me?" I froze. Leave who? I'd never seen this woman in my life. I reached for the accelerator, but before I could push it down, she pressed her palm against the window. Her skin was blue-white, almost translucent, veins faintly visible like thin black threads. And then she did something that still haunts me. She smiled again, only this time, her jaw unhinged. Her jaw hung open far wider than any human jaw should, like something had quietly snapped inside her skull. The movement was slow, deliberate, almost curious, as if she was testing how far it could go. I felt a sting of nausea claw up my throat. The inside of her mouth wasn't dark like a normal person's. It was pale, almost colorless, like the inside of a fish's gills. That's when she knocked. Not with her fist, with her forehead. A dull thud against the glass, then another, and another. Each hit left a faint, wet smear on the window. I slammed my foot on the gas. The truck roared forward, the engine straining as the wheels fought for traction on the icy road. Snow blasted against the windshield, turning the world into a blur of white streaks. My heart hammered so violently, it felt like it might burst through my ribs. I forced myself to look ahead, but I couldn't resist glancing back at the mirror. She was running beside the truck, barefoot, silent, her head still tilted, jaw hanging loose as she kept smashing it lightly against the door like she wanted to be let in. Yet, her feet weren't touching the ground. She was floating, her toes just grazing the snow as if she weighed nothing. Then, just as suddenly as she'd appeared, she veered away, drifting toward the tree line, disappearing into the darkness between the pines. The knocking stopped, but the smell of pond water still filled the cab. I didn't stop driving until the sun's first pale light touched the horizon. The world slowly turned from black to gray, then to the icy blue of early morning. My hands were still trembling, gripping the wheel as if letting go would somehow let her back in. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see her floating alongside, smiling that impossible smile. When I finally reached a rest stop outside Fort McMurray, I pulled over and sat in silence. My engine was still running, the cab filled with the lingering stench of that decayed pond water. I couldn't shake the image of her pale, tilted face and unhinged jaw from my mind. Even now, I can feel her gaze on me, cold and unrelenting, like she's etched into my memory. I tried to call dispatch to report the incident, but every call failed. The radio crackled, but instead of voices, it carried that same distorted whisper repeating my name. Calvin, 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 over and over. My stomach turned. I slammed the radio off. I considered leaving the truck, running to the office, or telling someone what happened. But as I stepped out, I noticed something in the snow beside the cab, a single footprint, bare, blue-white, and impossibly elongated, leading from the median to the passenger door. And then it vanished. No continuation, no trace in the snow beyond that point. It was as if she had walked halfway through our world, then stepped out completely. My mind tried to rationalize it. Frostbite, hallucination, exhaustion. But deep down, I knew she wasn't human. Sleep didn't come that morning or the next night. I tried to convince myself it was over, that she was just some figment conjured by isolation and frostbite. But Alberta highways are long, and the dark stretches are lonely. And something about that woman's presence felt anchored to me, not just the road. 2 nights later, I was hauling a load to Edmonton. Same stretch, same time of night. My headlights cut through a curtain of blowing snow, and I felt my pulse quicken. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her silhouette in the median again. Barefoot, nightdress soaked, hair frozen into jagged icicles. I froze, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles cracked. She didn't move. She just stared. Then she raised a hand, slowly, deliberately, and pointed directly at me. My radio crackled, and a single word came through, distorted and almost metallic. Leave. The hairs on my neck stood on end. I obeyed instinctively, pressing the accelerator, tires sliding dangerously on the icy road. She didn't follow this time. She just vanished into the darkness once more. But when I glanced in the mirror one last time, I noticed a new detail, something I hadn't seen before. In the shadow of the trees behind her, I could just make out multiple figures, pale and still, standing in the snow, all watching. I didn't stop until the city lights of Edmonton broke the night, and even then, I felt like I was being counted, After that night, I started avoiding Highway 63 whenever possible. But the job doesn't allow detours, especially in winter. Weeks passed, and I tried to put the memory behind me. I told no one, not dispatch, not friends, not even my family. Who would believe me? A ghostly woman, unhinged jaw, gliding across the snow. I was a trucker, not a lunatic. Then came the text. At first, I thought it was a wrong number. My phone buzzed while I was fueling up near Lac La Biche. The message read, "Calvin, why did you leave me?" No number attached, no reply option. Just those words, flickering on the screen like static. I dropped the phone into my coat pocket and forced myself to breathe. Maybe it was some prank, right? Kids on the road messing with GPS spoofing. But deep down, I knew better. The words weren't random, they were personal. Only she could have known my name. As I climbed back into the truck, I noticed the snow beneath the tires had an odd pattern. It wasn't footprints, not exactly. More like shallow grooves, perfectly spaced, leading from the median, trailing just behind the truck, following my path. I shook my head, gripping the wheel. Every rational thought told me to keep driving. But every instinct screamed that the woman, the figures, was still out there, watching, waiting. And that's when the radio hissed to life. One final whisper. "You can't escape me, Calvin." I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something unnatural was following me on these highways. My hands shook as I drove through the night, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. The further I went, the heavier the feeling became, as if the air itself was pressing against my chest. I kept glancing at the mirrors, half expecting to see her or the shadowy figures again, but nothing. For now. Hours later, near a secluded stretch past Dead Man's Flats, the headlights caught movement ahead. A shape. At first, I thought it was another vehicle, or maybe an animal. But as I drew closer, I saw her. Barefoot, nightdress torn and frozen stiff, hair slicked with ice. And she wasn't alone. Behind her, dozens of shadowy figures emerged from the snow and trees, like a silent procession. None made a sound. None moved unnaturally fast. They simply walked in place, their pale faces fixed on me. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. My truck skidded across black ice, tires squealing. She raised a hand, and every shadow seemed to freeze in the exact same posture, like they were puppets. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The wind and the snow drowned everything. My heart pounded like a war drum, and I realized, with absolute certainty, this wasn't just one ghost. She had called them, and they were all waiting for me. I gripped the steering wheel with every ounce of strength I had left. The figures didn't move toward me. They didn't need to. Just their presence. It felt like gravity pressing down, an invisible weight pinning my chest. My mind raced for a rational explanation, but I couldn't find one. None of it made sense. None of it was human. And then, she spoke. Not a whisper this time. Her voice rang clearly across the cab, yet outside the highway remained empty. "You shouldn't have left me behind." It wasn't accusatory, not angry. It was knowing, personal, terrifyingly intimate. I floored the accelerator. Tires screamed against the ice, the truck fishtailing dangerously, trailer jackknifing slightly, but I kept going. The figures didn't chase me. They didn't vanish either. They simply lingered in the peripheral edges of my vision, fading into the forest as dawn slowly broke. The woman? Gone. I reached Edmonton without incident after that, but I never returned to that stretch at night. Friends suggested I'd hallucinated, sleep-deprived, and stressed. I'd love to tell myself the same thing. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, when the roads are quiet and the snow is falling lightly, I swear I can still hear her whisper my name over the static of the radio. Years later, I still drive the Alberta highways, and every time I see an empty median, I feel that same prickle of dread, wondering if she and the shadows behind her are still waiting for the next trucker to leave them behind. My name is Ethan Clark, and I've been driving trucks across Alberta for over a decade. I've pulled through blizzards, icy curves, and desolate roads where no one else dares tread. But nothing prepared me for the night I picked up the hitchhiker on Highway 40. It was mid-February, late at night. The highway stretched endlessly into darkness, flanked by dense forests that swallowed any light. My rig rumbled along, headlights piercing a wall of snow, radio crackling softly. I thought I was alone, until I saw her, standing in the middle of the shoulder, thumb out, frozen to the bone. At first, I hesitated. Stopping on this highway in the middle of the night was reckless. But she looked desperate, shivering, and her eyes, they weren't ordinary. They glimmered in the headlights with a strange, unnatural green hue. "Need a ride?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. She nodded silently and climbed into the cab. As she settled, I noticed her coat was thin, soaked, and coated in frost. Her hands were trembling, but not from cold. Something about her posture, the way she avoided looking at me, set every nerve on edge. I started the truck again, slowly pulling onto the icy road. Then she spoke, her voice soft but piercing. "Do you drive long at night?" I nodded, trying to keep it casual. But the moment she said it, the temperature in the cab plummeted, and I saw my breath puff out like a furnace. But there was no heat on. The air in the cab felt heavy, almost suffocating, like someone had sealed it off from the world. I kept my eyes on the road, hands tight on the wheel, but I couldn't stop glancing at her. She sat perfectly still, almost statue-like. Yet every so often her eyes would flick toward me, always catching mine in the rearview mirror before I could look away. I usually drive alone," I stammered, trying to sound casual. My voice sounded small, fragile against the hum of the engine. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she traced a finger along the frost coating the window, leaving a faint smear that sparkled like ice crystals in my headlights. Then she spoke. "They follow me, and they'll follow you if you don't help." I swallowed hard. "Follow you? Who?" Her green eyes stayed locked on mine, but she didn't answer. A cold wind blew through the cab, even though the windows were closed, and the gauges on the dashboard flickered for a second. My stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, I caught movement in the snow just beyond the headlights. Figures, too far away to make out clearly, but human-shaped, standing along the tree line, motionless, watching. When I blinked, they were gone. I turned to her, panic rising. "Where did they go?" She simply smiled faintly. "They never leave. They just wait for the next driver." My grip on the wheel tightened until my knuckles burned. The words, "they never leave," echoed in my mind, crawling under my skin. I tried to rationalize. Maybe she was a runaway, a prankster, someone hallucinating like me. But something about the way she spoke, so calm and certain, froze every doubt in place. We drove in tense silence for several kilometers. Every time I thought I could relax, the temperature would drop sharply, frosting my breath against the windshield. And every so often, in the corner of my eye, I'd see movement along the tree line, shapes that shouldn't have existed. Human, yet wrong. Limbs too long, heads tilted unnaturally, glowing faintly in the dark. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice low. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "I'm not sure, but you need to see it. You need to know why they haunt the roads." A shiver crawled up my spine. I realized then that no matter how far I drove, no matter how fast, I was already trapped in whatever world she belonged to. Suddenly, a figure appeared directly in the middle of the lane ahead. A man, tall and thin, completely motionless. I slammed on the brakes, tires skidding on ice. My headlights flickered, then died for a second, plunging the truck into darkness. When the lights came back, the figure and the woman were gone. but a faint whisper lingered in the cab. "You can't leave now, Ethan." I yanked the wheel, heart hammering, desperate to regain control. The truck swerved slightly on the ice, trailer fishtailing, snow spraying over the hood. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. I forced myself to focus on the road ahead, telling myself it was just a trick of light, exhaustion, paranoia. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. She leaned closer, and for the first time, spoke clearly, her voice low but cutting through the hum of the engine. "They've been waiting for someone like you. They follow, and they never stop. If you look back, you'll see them." I didn't dare look back, but my peripheral vision caught something moving, or rather, multiple somethings. Shadows flitted between the trees, disappearing when I tried to focus. My stomach twisted. The highway seemed endless, yet every mile stretched on like eternity. I tried calling dispatch, any number, anything, but the radio remained silent. The static grew louder, coiling into a distorted whisper that seemed to chant my name. I slammed the radio off, but it was as if the sound lingered in the air around the cab. Then I noticed something chilling. The snow along the shoulder was no longer empty. Faint, wet footprints appeared out of nowhere, forming a trail beside the truck. And the closer I looked, the more I realized they were perfectly spaced, as if pacing the truck without ever falling behind. I realized with dread, she wasn't alone, not even close. Not. Panic gripped me like icy fingers. The footprints paced the truck perfectly, never faltering, never ending. I tried to convince myself it was snow drifting oddly, but instinct screamed otherwise. Every rational explanation shattered when I glanced at the passenger seat. She wasn't sitting anymore. She was kneeling on the seat, her head now level with mine, green eyes glowing faintly in the dark cab. Her thin fingers traced the dashboard, leaving frost where she touched. I couldn't move. My hands were frozen to the wheel, not from cold, but from fear. "They'll take you if you don't help me," she whispered. "Take me? Who?" I choked out. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached toward the radio and slammed it. The static transformed into distorted screams, high-pitched, layered voices that seemed to echo from inside the cab itself. I slammed the brake pedal instinctively, sending the rig into a dangerous fishtail, snow flying in every direction. When I finally stabilized, I looked to her. She was gone again, just vanished. The cab felt impossibly cold. The frost inside the windows thickened, and I realized something horrifying. Her presence didn't just inhabit the truck, it had altered it, twisted it into her space. Outside, the footprints continued, pacing alongside the rig, as if marking every second of my terrified journey. And then I heard the faintest of footsteps. On the roof of the truck, I slammed my head back against the seat, heart hammering, listening. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps on the roof echoed over the cab, yet outside the snow was untouched. My mind screamed at me to stop, to pull over, to escape. But I knew there was nowhere to go. The highway was a frozen ribbon of emptiness, flanked by forests that swallowed sound. I tried calling dispatch again. Nothing. Just static, thick and heavy, curling into distorted whispers. Then, a voice cut through clearly. Her voice, calm, almost maternal. "You must keep driving, Ethan, or they will take you too." I didn't know who they were, and I didn't want to. But instinct told me she wasn't joking. My hands shook violently as I gripped the wheel, pressing down on the accelerator to maintain traction on the ice. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a faint flicker in the tree line. Shadows moved unnaturally, weaving between trees at impossible speed. And suddenly, the woman appeared outside the driver's side window, gliding alongside the truck, head tilted unnaturally, eyes locked on mine. She didn't speak. She just pointed toward a bend in the road, a curve I knew was treacherous, black ice likely waiting. My stomach dropped. The sense of being watched, hunted, was overwhelming. I realized that this hitchhiker was no victim. She was a guide. And if I didn't follow her instructions, I would be the next lost soul on Highway 40. My hands were numb, and my heart pounded so violently it felt like it would shatter my chest. I gritted my teeth and followed her silent guidance, steering carefully through the curve she indicated. The truck tires groaned over hidden patches of black ice, but I managed to keep it on the road. The cab was deathly silent, except for the faint crunch of snow under the trailer wheels. I stole a glance at her. She sat back in the passenger seat now, but her eyes never left me, glowing faintly green. It felt like she could see every thought, every fear, every heartbeat. Then I noticed something more chilling. The shadows along the tree line were gathering, emerging slowly from the forest. They weren't walking. They were sliding, gliding over the snow in perfect silence, keeping pace with the truck. I could see elongated limbs, pale skin glistening faintly in the headlights, heads tilted unnaturally. I realized she had been right all along. These weren't figments of my imagination, and they were waiting for someone else to join them. The temperature dropped further. Frost spread across the windshield from the edges inward. I tried starting the heater full blast, but it did nothing. Her hand rested lightly on the dashboard, and with a faint flick, all the gauges on the panel flickered and dimmed. Her voice whispered again, soft and terrifyingly calm. "Drive carefully, Ethan, or they will claim you next." I couldn't take my eyes off the road, yet every muscle in my body screamed at me to look out the mirrors. Shadows flickered along the tree line, gliding closer with each mile. My chest tightened as I realized that no matter how fast I drove, the presence of those figures didn't waver. They were tethered to me now, or maybe to her. She leaned forward, her voice soft, almost hypnotic. "Do you see them? They follow, always. But if you obey, they leave you. For now." I swallowed hard, forcing my shaking hands to keep control. Each curve of the highway brought a new wave of terror. Shapes flickered in the periphery, sometimes a pale face, sometimes a shadow stretching unnaturally long. I tried to ignore them, but my mind kept filling in details. Their eyes, blank and endless, staring right through me. Suddenly, a gust of wind rattled the cab, and frost spread rapidly across the inside of the windshield. I could barely see the road ahead then. Out of nowhere, a faint silhouette appeared on the shoulder. Another figure, mirroring her posture, her tilt, her glowing green eyes. It didn't move, it just watched. She reached over and pressed a cold hand against my arm, sending a shiver that went straight to my bones. "Keep driving," she whispered. "They will vanish, but only if you obey." The forest around us seemed to lean closer, as if the trees themselves were waiting for me to falter. I could barely breathe. Each mile dragged on like an eternity. My mind raced, trying to rationalize any explanation, but logic had no place here. Every instinct screamed to stop, to run, to abandon the truck. But I knew if I did, the shadows wouldn't hesitate. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the tree line. Faint, pale figures gliding toward the road. Their elongated limbs moved unnaturally, like marionettes on invisible strings. I swallowed hard, realizing with a jolt that they weren't just following me. They were mimicking her, learning, shaping themselves around her form, the way she had told me. The temperature dropped even further. Frost crept across the edges of the windshield, blurring the road ahead. My breath came in short, visible puffs, though the heater was at full blast. I tried shaking off the fear, focusing on the curve up ahead, the only stretch of road I could see clearly. Then she spoke again, soft but commanding. "You will reach the clearing soon. Drive carefully. If you falter, they will claim you. They always claim those who hesitate." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. My heart pounded, every nerve screaming. The highway stretched endlessly into darkness, yet I sensed the clearing ahead, an open stretch of road where the forest seemed to stop, where snow reflected pale moonlight. I gripped the wheel with white knuckles, praying I could reach it before they caught up. The clearing came into view, pale moonlight reflecting off the snow-covered stretch of road. My hands were numb, my heart pounding in my throat. But I forced myself to keep driving, one careful mile at a time. The shadows that had haunted me along the tree line now paused at the edge, as if respecting some invisible boundary. She leaned back, her expression unreadable, green eyes flickering softly. "You made it," she whispered, voice calm yet chilling. "For now." I exhaled shakily, trying to convince myself the nightmare was over. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The highway behind me seemed empty. No shadows, no figures, no glowing eyes. Relief surged, but it was fragile, like ice cracking underfoot. Just as I started to relax, a soft, almost inaudible whisper came from the cab. "They will wait for the next one." I realized then that she hadn't disappeared. She had left me alive, yes. But the forest, the shadows, the haunting, they weren't bound to her anymore. They were part of the highway itself, waiting for any driver foolish enough to stray into their path. I reached Edmonton without incident after that, but I never drove Highway 40 at night again. Even years later, the memory lingers. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right through the cab, I can still hear her voice. "Drive carefully, or they will find you next." My name is Logan Mitchell, and I've been a long-haul trucker in Alberta for nearly 15 years. I've seen blizzards, treacherous roads, and nights so silent you could hear your own heartbeat over the engine hum. But nothing prepared me for the night at the lone rest stop off Highway 63. It was early December, the kind of night where the darkness feels like a living thing. The snow had just stopped falling, leaving the highway glistening and deserted. I was running low on fuel, and the rest stop appeared like a beacon in the endless black. Its lights flickered weakly, casting long, distorted shadows across the snow. I parked my rig, stepped out, and the cold hit me like a wall. The wind had died down, leaving the world unnervingly still. That's when I saw it. A figure leaning against the far corner of the rest stop building. At first, I thought it was another trucker. But the figure didn't move, didn't blink. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, watching me silently. I forced myself to shake off the unease and approach the door. The wind whispered faintly through the broken signage, carrying a sound I couldn't place, like muffled footsteps pacing inside the building, though it was empty. As I stepped inside, the fluorescent lights flickered violently, then went out, leaving me in darkness with the figure. Or was it now behind me? The darkness pressed down on me as I fumbled for my flashlight. Its weak beam cut through the black, illuminating cracked tiles and snow dust that had blown in through broken windows. The figure wasn't there anymore, or perhaps it never had been in the corner I first saw. But I could feel it, like a weight in the room, just behind me. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking. Only silence replied, except for faint, deliberate footsteps echoing from the upper floor. My stomach churned. I hadn't seen a staircase leading up, but I knew the sound was coming from somewhere above. I took a tentative step forward. The floorboards groaned, and frost seemed to creep across the edges of the walls, like the building itself was exhaling cold. Then I saw it. A shadow moving across the ceiling, thin and elongated, gliding unnaturally fast. My heart hammered. I tried to rationalize wind, snow, stress, but the shadow's movements mirrored mine exactly. Every step I took, it shifted in perfect synchronization. Then, a whisper slithered along my neck. "Why are you here, Logan?" I spun around. Nothing. Only the faint smell of wet earth and snow. My flashlight flickered violently, and in that brief darkness, I could have sworn I saw a pair of glowing eyes staring at me from the corner of the room. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. I've been alone in deserted buildings before, and fear plays tricks. But this was different. The air was thick, heavy, carrying a scent of damp earth and decay. I shivered and pressed forward, stepping carefully over debris. The echo of those footsteps grew louder, circling me now. I tried to locate the source, but every corner I turned, the sound mirrored me, sometimes even slightly ahead, like the building itself was alive, stalking me. A door at the far end of the room creaked open slowly, though no wind blew. I froze. From the darkness, a shape emerged. A woman, pale, soaked in snow and ice, hair plastered across her face. Her head tilted unnaturally, eyes glowing faintly green, watching silently. I swallowed hard, my voice gone. She didn't move toward me, but every instinct screamed that if I took another step, she would. Then she whispered, chillingly soft, "They wait here. Everyone who stops becomes one of them." I stumbled backward, tripping over a pile of broken crates. Frost spread across the floorboards where I landed, and the sound of distant footsteps multiplied, echoing like 1,000 tiny echoes in the building. I realized with horror that I wasn't alone, and I hadn't been for some time. I scrambled to my feet, heart racing, and ran toward the entrance. The door slammed shut before I could reach it, leaving me trapped in near darkness. My flashlight flickered, and the shadows on the walls seemed to twist and stretch unnaturally. The air smelled colder, sharper, like ice cutting through skin. From the upper floor came a slow, deliberate creak. A shadow detached itself from the ceiling, elongating downward toward me. My stomach turned. I didn't want to look up, but my eyes were drawn to it. An impossibly tall, thin, humanoid figure, limbs bending the wrong way, tilting as if gravity obeyed it differently. Then, the woman reappeared. She wasn't moving, yet I could feel her presence between my shoulder blades, whispering my name. "They hunger for the living. You must leave, but not before they mark you." I stumbled backward, tripping over a patch of frost forming on the floor. The whispers grew louder, now layered, as if hundreds of voices called my name from everywhere at once. I could hear the faint dragging of feet behind me, circling, pacing, anticipating my next move. In the dim beam of my failing flashlight, I saw the walls beginning to writhe. Faces, twisted, pale, hollow-eyed, emerged in the peeling paint. They stared at me, silently screaming. I realized this rest stop had claimed countless travelers before me. I needed to get out. I needed to survive. But the building had other plans. My back hit the wall as I frantically searched for another exit. Every window was barred, broken, or iced over. The whispers grew deafening, overlapping in a terrifying cacophony, calling my name, pleading, demanding. My flashlight flickered again, and in the brief dark, I glimpsed movement. Dozens of pale figures slipping along the edges of the room, circling, mimicking, waiting. I tried to run toward the back door. As I reached it, I felt it. Cold hands brushing my shoulder, ice digging into my skin, though no one was there. My heart raced as the whispers shifted, suddenly forming words. They mark those who linger. They follow the ones who survive. The woman appeared in front of me, not moving her legs, yet standing impossibly tall. Her head tilted unnaturally, green eyes glowing brighter than before. I understood then. She wasn't a threat herself. She was a gatekeeper, a warning. The danger was the others. I kicked the door open, sprinting into the snow outside. The wind hit me like a slap, carrying with it faint, distorted whispers. I didn't stop running until the rest stop was a distant, shadowy silhouette. Behind me, the faintest footprints appeared in the snow, but not mine. Small, pale, pacing in perfect rhythm. I knew the rest stop had marked me. And one day, it would call me back. I didn't stop running until the rest stop was far behind me. The snow crunched beneath my boots, but behind me, I could hear it. Soft, deliberate pacing. Not my footsteps. Something was moving in rhythm with mine. I dared not look back. The wind howled, carrying faint whispers that seemed to float from the trees lining the highway. I could feel icy fingers brushing my arms, though no one was there. The temperature around me dropped further, frosting the edges of my jacket and turning my breath into thick, visible clouds. Suddenly, I tripped over a mound of snow and fell forward, sliding across the icy shoulder. I glanced up in panic and saw dozens of pale figures at the tree line, gliding silently behind me. They were slow, deliberate, yet impossibly endless. Like the rest stop had spawned them, sending them out to claim me. Then she appeared again, the pale woman, hair plastered with frost, glowing green eyes piercing through the dark. She didn't speak. She simply raised a hand, pointing down the highway. Her expression was unreadable, but her presence carried a warning: keep moving or join them. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering, and forced myself forward. Every step felt heavier, the snow beneath my boots refusing to cooperate, yet I couldn't stop. I realized I was running not just for my life, but for my soul. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, illuminated only by the pale moonlight and faint reflection off the snow. Every time I slowed, I could hear it. Footsteps, whispers, the faint crunch of snow that wasn't mine. They were keeping pace, just beyond the trees, watching, waiting. I forced myself to keep running, ignoring the cold that burned my lungs and the numbness in my legs. Every now and then, the pale woman would appear beside me, just outside my peripheral vision, her green eyes urging me onward. It was as though she was guiding me, yet I knew she could not save me. She could only warn. The whispers grew louder, almost chanting now. You cannot stay. You cannot linger. You cannot look back. The voices overlapped, forming a distorted symphony of dread. My stomach turned. I dared not glance over my shoulder, though the instinct burned at me. Then I reached a small bridge over a frozen creek, a place where the road opened up slightly. The shadows seemed to hesitate here, lingering at the tree line, but not crossing. I realized with horror that the clearing acted as a barrier, the first safe ground since the rest stop. But relief was fleeting. The woman whispered softly, almost inaudibly, "They will wait. They always wait. And next time, they may not let you escape." I collapsed onto the clearing, gasping for air. My hands shook violently, and my body felt like it had been crushed by invisible weight. The snow beneath me was pristine, untouched, except for the faintest of footprints surrounding me, not my own, pacing silently. The whispers softened, almost mournful, drifting on the icy wind. I looked around and saw the faint shapes of the shadows lingering near the trees, indistinct yet unnervingly human. I realized they weren't attacking. They were watching, marking, waiting for the next traveler who dared to stop at that cursed rest stop. The woman appeared in front of me, not stepping on the snow, her hair plastered with frost, green eyes glowing brightly. She tilted her head, expression unreadable. I wanted to ask her questions, but my voice was gone. All I could do was watch. Then, slowly, she raised a hand and pointed toward the distant highway, urging me to continue. As I obeyed, stepping carefully into the snow-packed road, I realized something. The rest stop, the shadows, and her. They were all tethered to this place, not me. For now. I kept moving, one careful step at a time, never daring to linger. Every once in a while, I glanced back, just for a second. The shadows receded slightly, fading into the trees. But I could still feel their presence, like a weight pressing down, following me invisibly. I didn't stop until I saw the faint lights of a small town in the distance. Safety, or at least what felt like it, lay ahead. The lights of the town were small and distant, but they felt like salvation. I stumbled forward, boots sinking into the snow, body numb, mind screaming. Every instinct told me to look back, but I forced myself to focus on the glow ahead. Behind me, I thought I glimpsed movement. A pale figure flitted along the edge of the tree line, too fast to be human. I ignored it, though my heart pounded in terror. The whispers had quieted but lingered in my ears, faint echoes, almost melodic, repeating, "You cannot linger. They wait." I reached the outskirts of the town and finally stopped, breathing heavily. The shadows didn't follow further. I could feel the tension in my shoulders slowly easing, but the memory of their pacing, their elongated limbs, and the piercing green eyes of the woman remained vivid. I knew then that I had survived, but only temporarily. The rest stop had marked me. It had watched me. And the whispers promised that next time, the encounter might not end with escape. Even years later, when I drive past that highway, I can feel the weight of unseen eyes, lurking, always waiting, just beyond the trees. And every time I pass the empty rest stop, I see her silhouette in the corner of my vision, watching, judging, warning. Some nights, when the wind carries faint voices over the snow, I swear I hear her whisper my name. I finally reached the town and collapsed in a small diner, shaking, numb, and half convinced I had imagined the entire ordeal. The waitress looked at me strangely, noticing my frost-covered hair and trembling hands, but said nothing. I ordered coffee just to feel warmth returning to my body. That night, I slept fitfully, haunted by the whispers, the shadows, and the green-eyed woman. I tried to tell myself it was a hallucination, stress, or exhaustion, but I knew better. The rest stop wasn't just a place, it was alive in some way. It collected those who lingered and sent its warnings to the next traveler. Years have passed since that night, yet I still avoid Highway 63 after dark. Every time I drive near that rest stop, a chill runs down my spine. I never stop there again. I never linger. Sometimes, when the wind whistles across empty roads and the snow falls silently, I think I see her, standing in the distance, green eyes glowing faintly, head tilted unnaturally. And I remember her words. They wait. And next time, they may not let you escape. The lone rest stop remains empty now, yet I know it still waits. silently claiming those who stray, while the shadows pace and whisper, forever watching. My name is Derek Coleman, and I've been driving trucks across Alberta for over a decade. I've seen blizzards that turned the highway into white death, bears wandering near the road, and the eerie quiet of abandoned towns. But nothing prepared me for the night I encountered the frozen highway phantom on Highway 881. It was late November, a thin layer of ice covering the asphalt. The wind howled through the open plains, carrying snow in sharp, biting gusts. I was hauling a refrigerated trailer filled with produce, and the radio was dead. Static filled the cab, hissing and whispering, masking the hum of the engine. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a moose or some wildlife. But as I approached, I realized it was a figure, thin and tall, pacing slowly along the snowbank. Its head was tilted, the outline almost distorted in the blowing snow. I slowed down instinctively, heart hammering. The figure stepped toward the road, yet didn't move its legs normally. It glided, perfectly in sync with my truck's speed. The chill in the air wasn't from the winter, it was from its presence. I gripped the wheel, trying to convince myself it was my imagination. But the eyes, or what I assumed were eyes, glowed faintly, green and unblinking, locked on mine. My heart raced as I tried to focus on the road. But the figure glided effortlessly beside me, perfectly keeping pace with my truck. I slammed on the brakes instinctively, but it didn't falter. It mirrored my speed, my movements, my every instinct. My stomach churned. The radio crackled violently, and faint whispers filled the cab. They weren't in English, more like layered tones, high-pitched and haunting, whispering directly into my mind. The truck felt impossibly heavy, as if some invisible weight pressed down on the trailer. I reached for my phone. No signal. Nothing. Panic set in. Every instinct screamed to escape, but I was trapped. The figure's head tilted unnaturally as if studying me, and then a faint, icy wind blew through the cab. Frost crept across the windows from the edges inward, and I could barely see the highway. Suddenly, the figure flickered like a shadow, appearing on the roof of the trailer. My breath caught. It wasn't just beside me. It could be anywhere. I slammed the accelerator, trying to outrun it, but my mind screamed that it was pointless. A voice, whispering my name, drifted into the cab. It wasn't coming from outside. It was in my head. Drive carefully, Derek, or join the others. I forced myself to keep driving, every muscle tight with fear. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, lined with snow-covered trees that swayed unnaturally. Each mile felt like an eternity. The figure kept pace, gliding silently, its glowing eyes locked on me through the windshield. Then, out of nowhere, the air grew colder. Frost crept inside the cab, forming on the dashboard and edges of the windows. My breath came in thick clouds. The radio emitted low, distorted screams, almost like distant cries for help, overlapping with the whispers that filled my mind. I glanced at my side mirror. Shadows had begun emerging from the tree line, thin and elongated, pacing the highway alongside me. They weren't just one figure anymore. They were multiplying, each one gliding silently, perfectly synchronized with the truck. I realized then that this wasn't just a ghost or hallucination. The frozen highway phantom had summoned them, others like it, waiting to claim the next traveler. A sudden gust of icy wind rattled the cab, and for a brief second, the phantom appeared inside the trailer, its elongated face pressed against the interior walls. I slammed the brakes, sliding on the icy road, snow spraying everywhere. I could feel it in my bones. If I didn't reach a safe place soon, the highway itself would consume me. I gritted my teeth and forced the truck forward, trying to ignore the whispers echoing in my mind. Each turn of the wheel felt like navigating through invisible chains, binding me to the highway. The pale figure's glowing eyes remained locked on me, moving in perfect tandem with the rig. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the shadows detaching themselves from the trees, gliding across the highway with unnatural speed. Each figure was elongated, faceless, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. I could feel them studying me, assessing my every reaction. Then, the woman appeared, or what I assumed was the woman. Pale, frozen hair plastered to her head, green eyes glowing faintly. She didn't speak, yet I understood her. "Keep moving, or you're done for." A sudden crunch under the tires made me glance down. Footprints pacing alongside the rig, but none were mine. I tried to shake off the panic, focusing on the curve ahead. The highway bent sharply, ice-coated and treacherous. One misstep would send the truck into the frozen ditch. The whispers grew louder, urgent, warning, yet indistinct. I could feel the air thickening, as if some invisible entity weighed down on the cab. The phantom glided closer, and I realized with horror that it could appear anywhere. Beside me, on the trailer, inside the cab. And I would never know where next. My hands shook violently on the wheel as I navigated the curve, every nerve screaming. The phantom glided alongside the cab, perfectly synchronized, and the shadows from the tree line mirrored its movements, multiplying with each passing second. Panic clawed at my chest. The radio crackled violently, distorted voices overlapping in eerie harmony. I felt the whispers inside my skull, pressing, demanding attention, telling me to slow down, to stop, but I knew better. Stopping would mean becoming part of them. Then, in the beam of my headlights, I saw a faint glimmer in the distance, a diner, lights warm and inviting against the endless snow. Relief surged, but I didn't dare celebrate. The phantom and its followers glided silently, pacing me perfectly, waiting to see if I'd falter. The temperature dropped further. Frost spread rapidly across the windshield. My breath clouded inside the cab, and my pulse raced like a drum in my ears. I pressed the accelerator, praying the diner's lights weren't a mirage. I reached the diner's parking lot, tires skidding over the ice. The shadows hesitated at the tree line. The phantom hovered a few feet from the truck, tilting its head, expression unreadable. Then it vanished, leaving only a faint trace of frost on the side mirror. I realized the highway had spared me, for now. But the frozen highway phantom and its spectral followers weren't gone. They waited, silently, for the next driver, foolish enough to traverse their domain. I collapsed inside the diner, shivering violently, my hand still gripping the wheel as if it were a lifeline. The warmth inside was comforting, yet I could feel it. A residual presence, a cold weight pressing against my chest. My mind refused to rest. The waitress eyed me strangely, but said nothing. I sat by the window, staring out at the empty, snow-covered highway. Every instinct screamed that the phantom and its shadows were still there, lurking just beyond the tree line, pacing silently, watching. I tried to calm myself, to rationalize, but the memory of glowing green eyes and elongated limbs burned into my vision. The wind outside carried faint whispers, barely audible over the hum of the diner. I realized then that I hadn't escaped. It had let me survive, temporarily. The shadows, the phantom, the haunting, they were all part of the highway itself. They waited for those who lingered, those who dared to stop, those who failed to respect the frozen domain. I sat in silence, drinking coffee I couldn't taste, heart still racing, Every car passing on the highway outside drew my gaze. I knew that the next traveler might not be as lucky. And somewhere, just at the edge of perception, I could feel the phantom watching, waiting, judging, its presence lingering in the frozen night, reminding me that the highway was alive and it never forgave. I spent the night awake, listening to the wind howl across the icy plains. Sleep didn't come. Every time my eyes closed, I saw the elongated limbs of the shadows, gliding perfectly beside the highway. Green-eyed phantom watching silently. Morning brought faint sunlight reflecting off the snow, but the terror lingered. I left the diner cautiously, checking the highway ahead. No figures, no shadows, just the endless white expanse stretching before me. I told myself it was finally over. But the memories haunted me. The whispers, the frost creeping into the cab, the feeling of invisible hands brushing my skin. It all lingered, a cold imprint on my nerves. Every mile I drove, I imagined those glowing eyes, always in the corner of my vision. I realized I hadn't survived because I was clever or fast. I survived because the phantom allowed it. That understanding didn't comfort me. It terrified me. Years later, I still avoid Highway 881 at night. And every time I pass the frozen plains, I swear I can feel them pacing in the snow, just beyond my headlights, waiting for someone else foolish enough to tread their frozen domain. The highway isn't just a road. It's a trap. And the phantom? It's the warden. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the windows, reminded me of the highway, the frozen phantom, and the whispers. My dreams were filled with elongated shadows gliding beside me, green eyes cutting through the darkness. I tried to tell friends and fellow truckers, but no one believed me. They thought I was exhausted, hallucinating, or exaggerating. Yet I knew the truth. Those who see it once are never truly free. The phantom doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. It waits. Occasionally, I'd catch a glimpse of movement in the snow outside my house, just at the edge of vision. A shadow pacing, perfectly synchronized, mirroring my steps even when I wasn't moving. It was impossible. It was real. The memory of that night on Highway 881 never left me. The whispers sometimes invade my thoughts, subtle at first, then persistent, almost beckoning. I understand now. The phantom claimed something from me that night, not my body, but my peace, my innocence, my ignorance. Every winter I drive slower, always alert, always watching. And I know deep down that one day it may return for me, or someone else, or both. The frozen highway is patient. It waits. And the phantom, it never blinks. The following winter, I found myself driving a different route, trying to avoid Highway 881 entirely. But fate, or perhaps the phantom, had other plans. Snowstorms forced me to detour, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I was drawn back toward the frozen highway. The wind howled through the cab, carrying faint whispers I could not ignore. Shadows moved at the edges of the road, pacing perfectly, waiting, testing my nerve. I gripped the wheel, remembering that night, remembering the frost, the glowing eyes, the whisper. Drive carefully, or join the others. I pressed the accelerator, forcing myself forward, every mile an act of defiance. The phantom glided beside me once more, ghostly and pale, green eyes locking onto mine. Its elongated limbs bent unnaturally, brushing the edge of the cab without contact. I knew this encounter wasn't random. It was a reminder, a warning. No trucker spoke of the frozen highway phantom. No one admitted seeing it. But I knew the truth. It waits, stalking the icy roads, claiming those who hesitate. haunting those who survive, feeding on fear, prolonging the terror. By the time I reached a small town beyond the snow, my hands were numb, my mind exhausted, and my heart still racing. I had survived once again. But the memory, the presence, the whispers, they were embedded in me forever. I finally reached safety, the lights of a distant town shining like salvation. The shadows receded, the whispers faded, and the wind carried only silence. Yet I knew it was only temporary. The frozen highway had claimed its presence in me, marking me in a way that could never be undone. I parked at the edge of town, shaking, frost forming on my jacket and hair. I looked back, half expecting to see the phantom still gliding alongside the highway. But it was gone. Only the snow and empty trees remained, eerily still, silently waiting. I realized then that the frozen highway phantom isn't just a story, a myth, or a hallucination. It's a predator tied to the icy roads, claiming travelers who falter, testing their resolve, feeding on fear, and ensuring that any who survive never forget. Years later, I still avoid the highway during winter nights. The memory haunts me. I can still feel the weight of its presence, the lingering whispers, the green eyes watching me, judging me. The frozen highway remains silent, patient, and deadly. And the phantom? It waits, always, for the next driver foolish enough to travel its icy path. Sometimes, when the wind howls across empty roads, I swear I hear it whisper my name, reminding me that escape is only temporary, and it never forgets. My name is Lucas Reed, and I've been a long-haul trucker for nearly 15 years. I've faced blizzards, wildlife, mechanical failures, and then long stretches of isolation. But nothing prepared me for the night I encountered the haunting at the northern rest stop on Highway 2. It was early February, the kind of night where the wind slices through layers of clothing and snow sparkles under pale moonlight. I was hauling a refrigerated trailer filled with frozen goods, and fatigue was gnawing at me. I decided to stop at the northern rest stop to rest for a few hours before continuing my route. As I parked, the lot seemed unusually quiet. No cars, no lights inside the restroom, nothing, just the hum of my engine and the howl of the wind. Something felt off, almost like the place was watching me. I stepped out to stretch and immediately felt the chill, not from the cold, but from the air itself. It was heavy, pressing against my chest, almost suffocating. The shadows around the lot seemed to move unnaturally, stretching and bending toward me. Then I saw her, a pale woman, standing near the edge of the lot, hair plastered to her head, icy breath visible in the moonlight. Her green eyes glowed faintly, unblinking, staring directly at me. I froze. My instincts screamed to leave, but something compelled me to watch. I forced myself to move. Stepping back toward the cab, every muscle tense, every instinct screaming at me to leave. The pale woman didn't move, didn't speak. She simply watched, her green eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. The wind carried whispers that weren't quite human. Soft, layered voices that drifted around me, overlapping and repeating, almost beckoning me to step closer. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was fatigue, hallucination, or stress. But the air was thick, pressing against my chest as if it had weight. Then I noticed movement behind the rest stop. Shadows stretched across the snow, elongating unnaturally, pacing toward me. I stumbled backward, almost falling into the icy lot. They weren't human, or at least not fully. Their limbs bent at impossible angles, and their heads tilted in ways no human neck could manage. I jumped into the cab, slammed the doors shut, and locked them. Frost had begun forming on the windows, and my breath hung thick in the cab. The whispers grew louder, now almost intelligible. "You shouldn't be here. Stay. Forever." My hands shook violently on the wheel. I knew that if I stayed, I would join them. Whatever they were, whatever they wanted, I didn't know. I started the engine, praying it would start, praying I could escape this nightmare alive. The engine roared to life, but the whispers didn't stop. They seeped into the cab, curling around my thoughts. The pale woman's eyes glowed through the windshield, following me as I inched the truck forward. I tried to focus on the road, but the lot behind me seemed endless. The shadows lingered at the tree line beyond the lot, perfectly still at first, then pacing in time with my truck. I could feel them, pressing against the cab, a weight that wasn't physical but impossible to ignore. The air inside the truck grew colder. Frost crept along the dashboard and edges of the windows. I could see my breath swirling in thick clouds, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw another pair of green eyes inside the trailer, glowing faintly. I forced my gaze forward, gripping the wheel tightly. The whispers had grown into almost a chant, soft yet insistent. "You cannot leave. You cannot leave." My pulse raced. Every instinct screamed to drive faster, to escape. But my mind froze with the realization. The northern rest stop wasn't just a place. It claimed those who lingered. I knew the only chance I had was to keep moving, to survive until I reached a safe distance. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, illuminated by faint moonlight reflecting off the snow. Every mile felt surreal, like I was driving through a frozen purgatory. The pale woman didn't move, but her eyes followed me, lingering at the edge of perception. Out of the corner of my eye, the shadows flitted closer, gliding silently across the snow, pacing alongside the cab in perfect synchronization. Their movements were unnatural, graceful yet terrifying. I dared not look directly at them, fearing what I might see. The whispers continued, faint now, but insistent, curling into my thoughts. I couldn't escape the sense that the rest stop was alive, that it had marked me, that it watched and waited. Suddenly, I glimpsed movement inside the trailer. Something was shifting among the frozen goods, too fast to be human. My hands clenched the wheel, knuckles white. I couldn't stop now. The moment I did, I would be trapped. Then, a gust of icy wind rattled the cab. Frost spread rapidly across the windshield. I realized with horror. The northern rest stop wasn't behind me anymore. It was with me, following me down the highway, invisible yet undeniably present. I pressed the accelerator harder, knowing that the road, the shadows, the phantom woman, they wouldn't relent until I reached safety or joined them. Hours passed, yet the shadows persisted. Every turn of the wheel was met with subtle movement at the edges of my vision. The green-eyed woman never left, her gaze fixed on me, judging, waiting. Inside the cab, the air felt impossibly cold, frost forming faster than my heater could counter. My breath fogged the windows, and the whispers returned, soft and insistent. "You cannot rest. You cannot linger. You cannot escape." I realized then that survival wasn't about speed. It was about endurance, about keeping my mind focused, resisting the pull of the rest stop. Every time I glanced in the mirrors, I thought I saw figures inside the trailer, moving among the frozen cargo. Finally, faint lights appeared in the distance, a small town offering temporary relief. I didn't dare celebrate. The shadows paused at the tree line just beyond the highway, and the pale woman tilted her head as if to say, "You've survived, for now." Even after I parked safely, frost-covered and trembling, I could feel it lingering. The whispers, the green eyes, the shadows pacing at the edge of perception. The northern rest stop had marked me, and I knew, deep down, it would be waiting for the next driver foolish enough to stop there. Even after reaching the town, sleep wouldn't come. Every gust of wind against the windows, every creak in the old building where I stayed, reminded me of the northern rest stop. The shadows, the whispers, the green-eyed woman, they were imprinted on my mind. I tried to tell myself it was over, that the rest stop had let me survive. But deep down, I knew the truth. The place doesn't release you. You carry it with you. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel elongated limbs brushing the edges of my vision, pacing silently beside me. During the night, frost spread across my bedroom window inexplicably, delicate patterns curling like skeletal hands. The whispers were faint but persistent, repeating my name softly, echoing in my skull. You belong. You belong. I got out of bed to check the street outside. Empty, silent. But the feeling of being watched lingered, oppressive and cold. The memory of the green-eyed woman's gaze remained burned into my mind. I realized then that the northern rest stop was more than a location. It was alive, a predator bound to the frozen highway and desolate landscapes, claiming fear as its sustenance. The thought made my stomach churn. I knew I had survived the night, but the mark of the rest stop had been etched into my soul forever. The following morning, I left the town cautiously, avoiding the highway that led back to the northern rest stop. Every mile away felt safer, yet I couldn't shake the sense that something invisible followed me. Passing isolated stretches of snow-covered road, I glimpsed shadows in the tree line, subtle but unmistakable, pacing slowly alongside the cab. They didn't move like humans. They glided, bending unnaturally, limbs elongated. I forced myself to look straight ahead, heart hammering. I realized the woman wasn't just a solitary presence. She was a sentinel, ensuring the rest stop's influence extended far beyond its boundaries. Her eyes, glowing faint green in my memory, haunted my thoughts. Every time I blinked, I could see her faint silhouette at the edge of perception. Even towns didn't offer true safety. Small flickers of movement in the snow, shadows bending impossibly, suggested the rest stop could follow you anywhere, patient, waiting. By the time I parked at a larger city outskirts, I felt a temporary relief. But the whispers were faintly echoing in my head. I understood. Surviving the northern rest stop wasn't about leaving. It was about enduring its shadow in your mind, indefinitely. Weeks later, I found myself reluctantly driving the same route due to delivery constraints. Anxiety gripped me. Every time I neared isolated lots or empty highways, my pulse spiked. The northern rest stop lingered in memory like a predator waiting to strike again. That night, a blizzard struck. Visibility was near zero. As I approached a familiar empty stretch, I saw faint movement at the tree line. Shadows glided alongside the cab. My stomach dropped. The whispers, faint but insistent, slithered through my mind. You cannot escape. I pressed the accelerator, heart racing, trying to outrun the sensation. But I knew it wasn't physical. The rest stop had marked me. The shadows and whispers existed within me, following my thoughts, lingering on the edges of perception. Then I glimpsed her. The pale woman, standing just at the lot's edge in the storm. Her green eyes glowed through the swirling snow. She tilted her head, and I understood. She was the sentinel, the warden of the rest stop. I gritted my teeth, gripping the wheel tighter than ever. I knew I had no choice but to keep driving, keeping my mind focused, resisting the pull of the rest stop's supernatural influence. The blizzard worsened. I could barely see the road ahead, but the feeling of being watched intensified. The shadows paced along the tree line, synchronized with my movements. My hands shook on the wheel. Every instinct screamed to stop, but stopping meant surrendering. The whispers were louder now, almost intelligible. You belong, you cannot leave. I felt frost forming on the cab edges, despite the heater running full blast. Ahead, I glimpsed faint lights. Another rest area, promising temporary relief. But I knew better. The northern rest stop's influence didn't end at its boundaries. The shadows remained, invisible and intangible, gliding silently, marking my path. As I passed the lights, a green glow flickered at the edge of the tree line. I could swear it was her eyes, the sentinel, observing, judging. The highway stretched endlessly, snow reflecting the faint, eerie light. And I realized the horror of the rest stop wasn't just the lot. It was the lingering presence, the permanent marking of those who survive. I kept driving, faster now, adrenaline pushing me forward. The shadows remained, pacing perfectly beside me, reminding me that the northern rest stop would follow, patiently waiting for the next traveler, and that survival was never guaranteed. Eventually, I reached a larger city, lights piercing the snowy night, offering temporary sanctuary. I parked the truck, shaking, frost forming on my jacket. The shadows and whispers were gone, for now. But the memory, the influence, the fear, they remained embedded in me. I understood that the northern rest stop wasn't just a place, it was alive. A predator bound to the lonely highway, feeding on fear, marking those who survived. The pale woman, the green-eyed sentinel, and the shadows weren't merely figments. They were extensions of the rest stop itself. Years later, I still avoid isolated highways at night. Every empty lot, every snow-covered stretch brings back the memory. The whispers, the pacing shadows, the unblinking green eyes. Survival wasn't freedom. It was endurance, knowing the presence lingered in my mind. Patient, waiting for the next traveler to falter. The northern rest stop had claimed me long ago. I survived physically, but mentally, its mark is permanent. I feel it in every gust of wind, every stretch of snow-covered highway, every isolated lot. And I know, deep down, that it waits, always, for the next driver foolish enough to stop, for the next mind unprepared for the whispers, for the next soul unaware that the rest stop never releases its prey. My name is Ethan Mallory, and I've spent over a decade as a long-haul trucker across the remote highways of Alberta. I've dealt with snowstorms, isolation, and wildlife. But nothing prepared me for the night I stumbled upon the frozen cabin on Highway 35. It was a bitterly cold December evening, and a blizzard had forced me off the main highway. My rig was heavy, tires crunching over ice, visibility nearly zero. I was exhausted, freezing, and desperate for shelter when I spotted it. A small, snow-covered cabin, lights faintly flickering inside. Relief surged through me. I parked my truck, hoping to rest for a few hours before continuing my journey. But as I stepped out, the wind carried an unnatural chill, one that wasn't from the storm. The air pressed against my chest, heavy and suffocating. The cabin looked ordinary at first glance, but the shadows around it seemed to move independently, stretching and bending in impossible ways. I noticed footprints in the snow leading toward the cabin, and then abruptly stopping, as if the occupant had vanished mid-step. A soft creak came from the door, followed by a faint whisper. "Come in, it's warm." My instincts screamed to turn and run, yet something compelled me to move closer. I didn't know it then, but the frozen cabin had been waiting for me. And whatever lurked inside, it never let anyone leave. I hesitated at the cabin door, my breath forming clouds in the icy air. The flickering light inside seemed warm, inviting even, but my instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. Finally, I pushed the door open. A faint smell of wood smoke and decay hit me immediately. The interior was small, rustic, but the air was unnaturally cold. Frost clung to the walls and windows, forming jagged patterns like frozen claws. I stepped in cautiously. A chair creaked behind me, but when I spun around, no one was there. The whispers returned, faint and layered, almost hypnotic. Stay forever." The cabin had no signs of life. No food, no bed, nothing. But a single chair sat by a tiny fireplace, rocking gently as if someone had just vacated it. My pulse raced. I could feel a presence pressing against my chest, intangible yet heavy, like invisible hands gripping me. I knew immediately that this wasn't just a cabin. It was alive. The frost patterns shifted subtly when I looked away, as if observing me. Shadows stretched along the walls, elongating unnaturally, pacing silently in the corners. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay. I had to understand what I was dealing with, or I would never escape the frozen highway or this cabin alive with malevolent energy. I tried to calm myself, thinking logically, maybe I'd entered an abandoned cabin, left untouched for decades. But the air was alive with whispers, chilling and persistent, echoing through my mind. "Don't leave, never leave." I explored cautiously, the floorboards creaking beneath my boots. Every shadow seemed to move independently, bending toward me. I glanced at the fireplace and realized the embers weren't natural. They glowed faintly green, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. Then I saw it. Faint footprints forming across the floor, appearing as if someone, or something, was pacing silently, leaving no tracks behind. The shadows in the corners stretched toward the ceiling, elongating unnaturally, bending like they were testing me, judging me. I tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. I yanked on it, heart pounding, but it felt fused to the frame, frozen in a supernatural grip. The whispers escalated, overlapping into unintelligible layers, pressing on my thoughts, clawing at my mind. I realized then that the cabin had chosen me. Survival wasn't a matter of strength or speed. It was about endurance, resisting the pull, and hoping the presence inside didn't claim me entirely. I retreated toward the center, hoping the warmth of the fireplace, even unnatural, would give me a foothold. A moment of clarity to plan my escape. Time lost meaning inside the cabin. Minutes felt like hours. Every breath I took was visible in the icy air, swirling around me like tiny ghosts. The whispers grew louder, now almost intelligible. "You are ours. Forever." I tried to focus, searching for a clue, a weakness, anything that would let me leave. The shadows pulsated in time with the fireplace's green glow, moving along walls and floorboards in perfect synchronization. Then I noticed a small trap door near the corner, partially covered in frost. It hadn't been there before, or perhaps I hadn't noticed. Trembling, I approached it, hand hovering over the icy handle. The whispers hesitated, almost curious, as if the cabin itself was aware of my discovery. I opened the trapdoor slowly. Darkness yawned beneath it, deeper than any basement I had ever seen. A faint green glow pulsed from below, drawing my gaze. My instincts screamed at me to retreat, but something compelled me forward. I climbed down, each step careful, every nerve alert. The air grew colder, denser, pressing against my chest like a physical weight. Shadows shifted along the walls of the hidden chamber, elongating unnaturally, following me, pacing silently. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that whatever lived in this cabin, it wasn't just haunting the space, it owned it. And it had been waiting for someone to discover its secret. The basement stretched far beyond what I expected. The green glow pulsated rhythmically, casting eerie shadows along the walls. I could see faint, frozen figures suspended mid-motion, as if trapped by invisible hands. Their expressions were twisted in terror, frozen eternally. Whispers now surrounded me, circling my mind like a storm. "Stay. Stay. You are ours." Every instinct screamed to flee, but the door above me had vanished. The cabin had closed off its exit, leaving me trapped in this icy prison. The frozen figures seemed to twitch subtly as I approached, their eyes hollow but somehow aware. The shadows stretched along the walls, bending and pacing, synchronized perfectly with my movements. Panic surged. I realized this wasn't a cabin, a haunted house, or even a supernatural trap. It was a sentient prison, alive with malice, feeding on fear and despair. It didn't just haunt travelers. It claimed them, trapping their souls in a frozen, eternal nightmare. I backed toward the green glow, trying to find a way out, my mind racing. The whispers overlapped into a chorus, echoing every regret and fear I'd ever had. I understood, in that chilling instant, survival was possible, but it required cunning, courage, and endurance. And even then, escape wasn't guaranteed. I braced myself, knowing the real trial was just beginning. The frozen cabin had claimed my attention, my fear, my will, and it was far from done with me. The green glow pulsed more intensely as I ventured deeper. The frozen figure's eyes seemed to follow me, hollow yet aware. Every step felt heavier, as if the air itself resisted my movement. Whispers swirled around my head, overlapping, layering into almost incoherent murmurs. "You cannot leave. You belong here." The shadows along the walls moved in tandem with my heartbeat, stretching and bending unnaturally. I realized that the basement itself was alive, feeding on my fear, testing my resolve. I had to stay calm, keep moving, or I would be trapped just like the others. At the far end, I saw a faint outline of a door, partially concealed behind ice-encrusted beams. It wasn't just a door. It seemed to pulse with the same green glow, almost breathing. I approached cautiously, feeling the air thicken around me. A voice, low and cold, whispered directly into my mind, "Turn back, or join them." My heart pounded, but I forced myself forward. There was no turning back. Survival meant reaching that door and risking everything, confronting the entity that had claimed this cabin. I took a deep breath, gripping my flashlight, and stepped toward the glowing doorway. The doorway led to a narrow corridor, lined with frost-covered walls. The green glow emanated from cracks in the ice, pulsating like a heartbeat, and shadows continued their silent, unnatural pacing alongside me. I could hear faint, scraping noises from the frozen figures behind me, like claws against ice. Every instinct screamed to run, but I pressed on. The whispers now spoke clearly. "You will stay. Forever." Suddenly, the corridor widened into a room filled with ice sculptures. Frozen travelers, mid-motion, expressions of horror etched into their faces. Some clutched frozen hands to their mouths. Others twisted as if screaming silently. I shuddered, realizing the cabin didn't just trap bodies. It captured souls, freezing them in time as eternal reminders of its power. A figure emerged from the shadows at the far corner. A woman, pale with glowing green eyes, hair plastered to her head, moving unnaturally. She didn't walk, she glided, silent yet purposeful. I felt the chill deepen, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. I gripped my flashlight tighter, knowing I couldn't stop. The frozen cabin had claimed its territory, but I was determined to survive. Every instinct screamed that the woman, the sentinel, was the key to escape. I needed to confront her, or I would join the frozen travelers forever. I moved toward the glowing sentinel, every step deliberate, my heart hammering. The whispers surged, pressing against my mind like icy hands. "You cannot leave. Join us." The frozen traveler's eyes seemed to follow me, pleading silently, warning me, but I couldn't stop. The green-eyed woman tilted her head as if observing my courage or my fear. The air around her shimmered with frost, swirling patterns forming like jagged claws. I called out, my voice trembling, "I won't stay. I'm leaving." The shadows recoiled slightly, then advanced, moving faster, their bending limbs brushing against the icy walls. She glided toward me, her gaze penetrating, unyielding. I felt my chest tighten, a suffocating pressure, as if the cabin itself was testing my will. I realized the green-eyed sentinel wasn't just guarding the cabin. She was the cabin, an extension of its will, its hunger, its insatiable appetite for fear. With a deep, steadying breath, I forced my mind to focus on one thing: escape. My hands tightened on my flashlight, and I began a slow, careful retreat toward the doorway I had entered. The shadows advanced, the whispers screamed, but I refused to falter. This was my only chance. Every nerve screamed danger, but surrender was no longer an option. I retraced my steps toward the corridor, trying to keep calm. The frozen figures seemed to twitch, their expressions of horror sharper, more desperate. Whispers overlapped into a deafening chorus. "You belong. Forever. Stay." The shadows pursued relentlessly, bending along walls, pressing on the edges of perception. My breath was visible, swirling in the icy air. I forced my focus on the doorway, counting each step, keeping my mind anchored in reality. The sentinel glided behind me, her glowing green eyes unwavering, watching every movement. I could feel her will pressing against my own, testing my resolve, probing for weakness. I stumbled, almost falling, but forced myself to continue. The corridor ended at the basement entrance. I reached for the trapdoor handle. It had thawed slightly, as if granting me permission. Every muscle burned, but I pulled myself upward, hearing the shadows recoil as if restrained by some invisible force. Finally, I burst into the main cabin room. The air felt lighter, though icy. The whispering receded, the shadows retreating toward corners, still lingering, patient, aware. The green-eyed sentinel paused at the doorway, tilting her head, her gaze piercing, before fading into the cabin's frost-covered interior. I knew then that survival wasn't over. The cabin had released me physically, but mentally, its mark was permanent. I emerged from the cabin into the snowstorm, gasping, shaking, frost clinging to my coat. The lights from the highway barely cut through the blizzard, but for the first time that night, I felt a sliver of relief. The cabin stood silent, untouched, yet alive. I knew it was waiting, patient, feeding on fear, marking those who survived. The frozen figures, the whispers, the sentinel. They weren't gone. They had simply retreated, watching, waiting for the next traveler foolish enough to seek warmth in a haunted highway cabin. Driving away, I couldn't shake the sense that the cabin's presence lingered within me. Every gust of wind, every isolated lot, every snow-covered stretch reminded me of the green-eyed sentinel gliding silently in the frost. Years later, I still avoid isolated highways at night. The frozen cabin may never claim me physically again, but its influence, its whispers, its shadows, remain embedded in my mind. Survival isn't freedom, it's endurance. And I know, deep down, that the cabin waits, always, waiting for the next trucker, the next traveler, the next soul unprepared for its icy, eternal grasp. I survived the frozen cabin, but it left me forever marked, a warning etched into my mind. Some shelters are traps, and some places are alive. My name is Lucas Reed, and I've been driving freight across northern Alberta for almost 15 years. I've seen blizzards that could bury trucks, wildlife that could topple a rig, and roads so desolate they felt like the edge of the world. But nothing prepared me for the highway phantom. It was late November, the sky dark and heavy with snow clouds. I had been driving for hours on Highway 88, a stretch infamous among truckers for its isolation and sudden, whiteout blizzards. My rig was loaded, my eyes tired, but I was determined to make the next checkpoint before the storm hit full force. Somewhere past the halfway mark, I saw a figure on the side of the road, a lone man, waving frantically. At first, I thought it was a stranded traveler. But there was something off. His posture was stiff, unnatural, almost robotic. His face, pale and gaunt, caught the dim headlights, reflecting an eerie glow that made my stomach knot. Instinctively, I slowed down, my pulse quickening. As I passed, the man didn't move, not like a normal person would. He stayed rigid, staring directly at me with hollow, unblinking eyes. My heart hammered as I realized he wasn't alive, or at least not entirely. The wind howled through the rig's cabin, carrying whispers that seemed to echo from the frozen tree line. Join us, join us. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, knowing this stretch of highway had a secret. And whatever haunted it, it was far from done. I tried to shake it off, blaming fatigue and the harsh highway conditions. The storm was intensifying, snow blinding me intermittently. But the image of that man, if he could even be called that, was burned into my mind. Hours later, I stopped at a small, deserted truck stop for a quick rest. It was barely lit, windows frosted over, and the lot empty. As I stepped out of the rig, I caught movement in the peripheral shadows, shapes flitting between the trailers, almost human, almost wrong. I shivered, the cold suddenly feeling heavier. Inside, the air was stagnant, the lights flickering. I tried to ignore the feeling of being watched, but it followed me into the restroom. In the mirror, I caught a glimpse of pale faces pressed against the glass from outside, dozens of them, staring with hollow, lifeless eyes. Heart pounding, I ran back to the truck. The rig's cabin felt like a safe haven, but even inside, the whispers lingered. Soft at first, then insistent, weaving through the hum of the heater. Join us, never leave. I started the engine, desperate to put distance between myself and the truck stop. But the highway ahead seemed to twist unnaturally, shadows moving along the edges of the tree line. It became clear. The highway itself was alive, and it wasn't letting me go. Back on the highway, the storm swallowed visibility. Headlights barely cut through the swirling snow, but I kept my eyes peeled. The shadows along the roadside seemed to stretch unnaturally, bending toward me as if trying to pull the rig off the road. Then I saw them. More figures, ghostly silhouettes pacing alongside the cab. They moved fluidly, almost gliding, their limbs elongated and contorted unnaturally. Each figure's face was pale, expressionless, with hollow eyes reflecting my headlights. I slammed on the brakes briefly, but they mirrored my movement, maintaining pace, always at the edge of perception. The whispers returned, louder, clearer. "You cannot leave. You belong." My hands shook on the wheel. The rig felt impossibly heavy, as if the shadows were pressing against it, trying to slow me down. I knew instinctively. Survival meant keeping calm, keeping moving, and never acknowledging them fully. The highway phantom wasn't a simple ghost. It was a predator, feeding on fear, claiming travelers one by one. I forced my gaze forward, adrenaline surging. The tree line seemed alive, branches reaching toward the truck as if trying to drag it into the darkness. Every mile was a struggle, every shadow a test. Hours into the storm, I noticed a strange glow up ahead. Faint, greenish, barely cutting through the whiteout. It flickered, moving, almost alive. I slowed, heart hammering, but couldn't resist looking closer. The glow led me to a small clearing, barely wide enough for the rig. There, I saw the highway phantom in full. A tall, gaunt figure with glowing green eyes, surrounded by dozens of shadowy silhouettes pacing silently. The air itself seemed to warp around them, cold and heavy. I realized with horror that the phantom wasn't just haunting the road, it controlled it. The blizzard, the shadows, the eerie glow. It was all part of its influence, designed to isolate and terrify anyone who dared travel this stretch. I tried to back up, but the rig felt stuck, as if the snow beneath it had thickened unnaturally. The whispers pierced my mind. "You cannot leave. Join us." Then, the green-eyed phantom tilted its head, observing me as if testing my resolve. Its companions mirrored every slight movement I made, perfectly synchronized, waiting. I knew I had to act carefully. Any wrong move, any falter in courage, and I would join the ranks of the frozen, hollow-eyed travelers claimed by the highway phantom. Desperation took hold. I knew I couldn't stop, but moving blindly might provoke the phantom. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, took a deep breath, and slowly edged the rig forward, keeping my eyes fixed on the faint light of the distant highway. The shadows pacing alongside shifted unnaturally, bending toward the cab, whispering in unintelligible voices, overlapping into a chorus that rattled my sanity. "You cannot escape. You belong. Forever." Suddenly, one of the green-eyed figures stepped into the headlights. Its expression was blank, but the presence it radiated was suffocating. I felt an icy pressure against my chest, like invisible hands trying to pull me out of the cab. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, tires spinning on the icy surface. The figures recoiled slightly, as if surprised by my defiance. The phantom tilted its head, observing, its companions pacing in perfect rhythm, waiting for the right moment to strike. I realized then that survival depended on focus, courage, and endurance. The highway phantom wasn't just a spirit. It was a sentient predator, marking travelers, feeding on fear, claiming those who faltered. With every mile I gained, the whispers faded, but the knowledge remained. The highway phantom waits, patient, always hunting the next lone driver who dares travel northern Alberta at night. The storm raged, snow swirling in every direction, but I forced myself to keep moving. The rig's headlights barely cut through the whiteout, yet every shadow seemed alive, bending toward the truck as if sensing my fear. The green-eyed phantom followed, gliding silently alongside the cab. Its companions mirrored its movements, pacing in perfect unison, their hollow eyes reflecting the dim headlights. I could feel their presence pressing against the truck, a suffocating weight that made my chest ache. The whispers returned, louder, overlapping into a maddening chorus. "You belong here. Forever." Every instinct screamed to flee, but I had to maintain control. Panic would cost me everything. Suddenly, the snow beneath the rig shifted unnaturally, forming a slick path that seemed to guide me forward. The figures didn't follow closely. Instead, they paused, waiting, watching, testing my resolve. I realized then that the highway phantom wasn't mindless. It was intelligent, calculating, and patient. It didn't need to attack immediately. It simply manipulated its environment, feeding on terror and hesitation. I gripped the wheel tighter and focused on the distant glow of the next rest stop. Survival meant endurance, courage, and a single-minded determination to escape the phantom's domain. The rig lurched slightly on an icy patch, sending my heart racing. The green-eyed figure tilted its head, studying me as if amused by my struggle. Its companions mirrored every twitch of the truck, perfectly synchronized, silent and menacing. Whispers filled my mind, layered and relentless. "Stop. Surrender. Join us." My pulse pounded in rhythm with the phantom's gaze. I refused to falter, forcing my eyes forward to the faint, flickering lights of the rest stop ahead. As I approached, I noticed the shadows stretching unnaturally, leaning toward the truck, testing my resolve. One figure darted ahead, crossing the road with impossible speed. I swerved slightly, heart hammering, but it reappeared instantly on the roadside, ghostly and silent, its hollow eyes locked on mine. The wind carried the scent of ice and decay, chilling me to the bone. Every instinct screamed that stopping, even briefly, would be fatal. I knew the phantom didn't just haunt the road, it owned it, manipulating snow, shadows, and perception to trap anyone alone. I took a deep breath and pressed the accelerator, racing against both the blizzard and the spectral hunters. The rest stop's lights were now visible, faint and welcoming. But the path to safety was far from certain. The rest stop came into full view, a small beacon amidst the storm. But as I drew closer, I realized the lot was empty, eerily quiet, lights flickering in a rhythm that almost mimicked a heartbeat. The green-eyed phantom paused at the edge of the lot, tilting its head as if gauging my determination. Its companions hovered at the tree line, pacing silently, watching, waiting. I could feel their presence pressing on me, testing my resolve. I parked quickly, leaving the rig idling, and stepped out cautiously. The snow was soft beneath my boots, yet every crunch echoed unnaturally, amplified by the stillness. I glanced toward the tree line, half expecting the phantoms to emerge. The whispers continued, distant yet clear. "You cannot escape. Join us. Forever." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. I needed a plan. The phantom wouldn't chase me into the rest stop if I remained vigilant, but any hesitation would be fatal. I realized I had a slim advantage: light and warmth. The figures disliked exposure, retreating toward shadows and snow when confronted with brightness. I stayed near the lights, inching toward the building. Every step was a test of courage, every breath a defiance of the highway phantom's relentless will. Escape was within reach, but only if I didn't falter now. Inside the rest stop, warmth and light offered temporary relief. But the phantom's influence remained, an invisible weight pressing on my mind. Shadows flickered along the walls, seemingly alive, bending and twisting unnaturally. I caught movement in the corner of my eye, a pale, hollow-eyed figure attempting to slip past the doorway. I froze, heart pounding, then slowly approached, using the fluorescent lights as protection. The figure hesitated, then melted back into the shadows, thwarted but patient. The whispers had quieted but now echoed in my mind. You belong to the highway. We are patient. Forever. I shivered, knowing they weren't gone. The phantom's intelligence was terrifying. It didn't need to chase me if it could break me mentally. I stayed near the register, every sense alert. The building creaked under the wind, and snow rattled against the windows like fingernails. I realized I was not just surviving physically. I was surviving mentally, resisting the psychic grip of the highway phantom. Minutes stretched like hours, but the storm outside had begun to ease. I could feel the phantom's presence withdrawing, though faintly, still watching, still waiting. Escape was near, but the lesson was clear. The highway phantom never forgets, and it never stops hunting. Eventually, I forced myself back into the truck. The storm had subsided, leaving only a light snow swirling across the highway. I started the engine and drove slowly, glancing into the tree line, half expecting the green-eyed phantom to appear. It never did. But the experience left an indelible mark. I realized the phantom's reach was not just physical, it was mental. A predator that could manipulate fear, perception, and reality. The highway would never be the same to me. Days later, I told other truckers about the highway phantom. Some scoffed, some listened warily, sharing tales of similar experiences, vanishing figures, whispers, impossible shadows. It became clear. This stretch of northern Alberta wasn't just isolated. It was alive, hunting, claiming those who traveled alone at night. I've driven these roads many times since, but I never travel alone anymore. I stick to daylight, to company, to safety. The phantom waits, patient, intelligent, always hungry. And I know that one day, another lone driver will encounter the highway phantom. And perhaps this time, they won't survive. I survived. But I carry the memory, the fear, and the knowledge. Some highways are more than roads. They're predators,